Studies. I'm the director, and I'm real delighted, to see so many faces here. This is great for this discussion. Number of weeks ago, months ago now, I guess, some of us who have classes who contribute to the gender studies minor were meeting, and we were talking about ways on how to breathe new breath into our gender studies program here at NMU. And there were folks around the table that were very excited to be able to have discussions about gender studies from all different disciplines, including English, including criminal justice, including, of course, Native American studies, and languages even as well. And so when we came together and we were trying to think of what would be a good way to do that, what would be a good way to kind of breathe new breath into gender studies, we thought, well, let's maybe see and do some research around the region, who's doing good work in this area. And so a number of us put forth names, and the name that rose to the top of the proverbial list was Lisa Poupart, who's here tonight from UW Green Bay. And one of the reasons that her name also was really one that came forward and kind of was a shining star next to a bunch of rock stars, don't get me wrong, very good people doing very good work out there, is because of her work combining gender and women's studies with First Nations studies at UW Green Bay. And for us at the Center for Native American Studies, this made a lot of good sense. So it is with great pleasure to honor our King Chavez Park's Visiting Professor Initiative faculty member, Dr.Lisa Poupart, and some very talented students from UW Green Bay who we've had the honor and privilege hearing from them all day in a number of presentations. And so this is their kind of, if you will, the best of the best now. They're coming together to kind of wrap everything up from their earlier presentations. So if I can, I'll go from far on the, to my left is Phoenix. Next to him is Kai. And then we have Tori. And we have Max. And of course, center stage is Dr. Lisa Poupart. So with that, I will, again, thank you for choosing to be here, being a part of this discussion that brings together a balance and harmony. I'm not going to try to say the word because that's an Anishinaabe word I've not seen, but to have that come together and braided together for this presentation this evening. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Poupart and the students from UW Green Bay.
Bonjour. Gwashkwaadiiziiwin Indigenous Makwa Indo Dem Waswaganing and Dunjma Anishinaabe and Dow. My name is Lisa Poupart, and some of you have been just amazing and stuck with us all day. This is your third time here in the room with us, so thank you for those of you that came out throughout the day to listen to us. And for those of you who are here for the second time or for the first time, thank you for coming. I've been saying this all day, and it's very true. I mean this very deeply. I'm humbled to have been asked to be here I said to April several months ago, are you sure you want me to come? And there's a lot of rock stars out there. No one's ever called me a rock star, but now I can't say that anymore. I've done some work with the help of a lot of amazing people, and none of that would be possible without the work of my elders and my family. And this term that's up there, Gwashkwaadiiziiwin, is a term that I learned from my cousin Ernie St. Germain. In our community, everybody calls him Uncle Ernie. And when you meet him someday, he'll be your uncle too. I talk about balance and harmony and the meaning of life. Well, I know why. Some of you came because you wanted to know the meaning of life. I promised I would tell you the meaning of life. That was our big thing. You come to the keynote because we're going to tell you the meaning of life. And Uncle Ernie has graciously taught me about the meaning of life, along with a lot of my other elders over the years. This morning we gave a talk on First Nations intergenerational healing and its importance in a higher ed setting. And we did just one little exercise on how we can begin that work as Indigenous people in order to decolonize, and working with white settlers who also need healing from the history of colonial traumas imposed upon Indigenous people. We all need healing. So we did one exercise very briefly at the end of that time together. And then this afternoon, we did a more informal discussion about the importance of gender studies in the higher ed setting, why we need it, how it's linked to job skills, its intrinsic value, and why students on this campus should work with the faculty to create the DREAM program, the program that shoots for the moon and reaches for the stars, all of those things. And I would say, I think we worked the hardest on this, the talk we're going to give right now, because it's bringing what is often two very different disciplines together. And historically, at times, those two disciplines, First Nation Studies or Native American Studies and Gender Studies, have been at odds in some terrible conflicts with one another. So it's been a challenge for me to really weave that together and talk about it in terms of our cultural value of balance and harmony and the meaning of it. So I think I'm starting, right?
Yep.
And if it's not seamless, it's because it's not. And we'll be looking at each other like, whose turn? Who's on next? And who's changing the slides? Do we know that?
I was going to say that's.
We didn't figure that one out. I think it's seamless. I'm going to pass the mic, though, and have each of my student colleagues up here introduce themselves. The four of them are in a course right now with me, and we have 20 other students back home that are waiting for us tomorrow. We're leaving tonight because we have class tomorrow. And they're reading the textbook in the car with flashlights on the way home. And we would have loved to have brought the entire class. These are four of the rock stars in that class, but there are 25 rock stars, or 24, and it's a phenomenal group. I only had room for 4 students in my car. These were the 4 that I had the privilege of bringing along. And I want to thank all my colleagues here that supported the students coming and invited me to come. So I'm going to pass the mic down this way. Introduce yourself. Say something about who you are and what brings you here.
My name is Phoenix. I'm a sophomore at UW Green Bay. I'm currently double majoring in Democracy and Justice Studies with an emphasis in Women's and Gender Studies and Human Development. But I'll find out in about 2 months whether or not I get accepted into the social work program. I'm really excited to be here. I was super pumped to get invited, and it's been a really cool day. Also, you guys have a Starbucks, and we don't have one of those on campus. So I'm kind of jealous. It's like, maybe I'll just hide in someone's dorm room and never go home. Like, I'm okay with just living here forever.
Phoenix has had so much coffee
Oh my
today.
gosh, you guys don't even know. Probably, I think I'm at 7 cups today.
Bonjour, my name is Kai. I am a First Nation Studies major at UW Green Bay. I'm Métis and Anishinaabe from Sault Ste. Marie. And although I'm not a gender studies minor, I have a really strong interest in the topic and how to incorporate both that along with First Nation studies. So I was really excited on this trip.
Hi, my name is Tori. I'm a Democracy and Justice Studies major with an emphasis in Women and Gender Studies. I ended up choosing this major because I took the Intro to DJS class and just couldn't think of I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. I just couldn't visualize sitting down in computer science or psych or anything else. And I feel like I've also found a home in the First Nation Studies department. And I'm considering a double major, but I would also like to graduate before I'm 40. So we'll see about that. I'm also working on a certificate for nonprofit management and tentatively looking at grad school for archival or library science.
My name is Max Winston. I am a Psych and Human Development student at UWGB. I work for a nonprofit organization in Green Bay called My Innovative Services, where we help individuals learn independent skills, job skills, and stuff like that. So, and for this topic especially, I'm really interested in gender, so I'm very happy to be here.
On the slides that you see up here, the one on the far right and the one in the bottom center slide, those are photographs from our First Nation Studies Center on our campus. And on our campus, I think we were the very first First Nations or American Indian Studies program in the U.S. to house 4 oral traditional elder scholars. We have 4 elders in residence on our campus. They're there 5 days a week. In the First Nation Studies classroom at UW Green Bay, we really try to model Indigenous teaching and learning, and the faculty all spend time learning from elders, studying the way elders teach. And we recognize that we can teach some content, and we can try to bring those practices into the Western classroom, but that real learning in the tribal world always comes from elders. And so we have a number of opportunities for our students to study intensively. We pair our majors with elders in the tribal community. They do a 12-credit intensive 1-semester apprenticeship with an elder around lots of particular specific topics like star maps, where the younger person will study star map knowledge with an elder, or traditional gardening practices. But that's not well suited for a campus with several thousand students, right? We would never send everybody out into the tribal community. So we designed a way for the elders to come to campus and spend time with students. So the students come in a very informal setting, eat their lunch, have coffee, and visit with elders. And relationships are built there, which is one of the foundational concepts of education in the tribal world. We can't teach until we've really made a connection with our students. So you'll see this oval. It's not an ideal room for sitting in a circle, but we've done our best, and we have an oval table in the room. Students come in and spend time visiting with the oral scholars in residence, and it's amazing. The elders might talk about things like NASCAR and Jimi Hendrix and things you would never expect a tribal elder to have a carry-on discussion about Jimi Hendrix. But what they're doing is building a relationship. They're talking about things with students initially that the students might know something about. Students know about NASCAR or the Green Bay Packers. Everybody where we live knows something about the Green Bay Packers. And once over time that relationship is established, the elders might start talking about their experiences under treaty rights and treaty rights resistance and protesting in our region. Shirley Barber, who's in the top right, let's see, she's second to the left. She will share her boarding school experiences as a way of teaching students about our history as it impacted her individually. So what does this have to do with the meaning of life? Well, over in the other corner, right, you see a couple of guys. I think those 2 guys are Plato and Aristotle, or Socrates, or I don't know, I Googled some old guys, some philosophers. My point is that in Western society, in Western culture, we have spent a very long time asking this question. What is the meaning of life? Why are we here? What is the purpose of human beings? And I don't know that we have the answer to that even today, after thousands of years of asking this question. What is the purpose of human beings? Why are we here? What should we be doing? And in the tribal world, we haven't been asking that question for 1,000 years because we've always known the answer. And the answer to that question is very simple. The answer is simple. How to live it is a little more difficult. But the answer to that question is Gwashkwaadiiziiwin. It means balance and harmony. In the tribal world, and it doesn't matter so much which tribal community you're in, you could go across Turtle Island and ask people in the tribal world in their communities, what are human beings here for? And the answer will sound a little bit differently, but the value is always the same. And it comes down to something like this, very similar, and that is live a life of balance. It's central. It is the meaning of life. I had an elder say to me once, my girl, your purpose, our purpose as human beings, is to love all of the other beings on the planet, to be a loving being, to live a life of balance. That's the meaning of life. Now you know, right? You guys got your money's worth in having me come to visit you today, because now you know the meaning of life. It's live a life of balance. That's it. You should all be writing that down so that you don't forget over the next 1,000 years that knowledge isn't lost. So what does that mean? One of my teachers, an ally from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, who's now walked on, John Boatman, taught classes at the university for many years. And this was his definition of balance. To John Boatman, balance is, or was, the state in which the positive aspects or the positive energies of the universe equal the negative aspects, from the microcosmic level to the macrocosmic level. So I teach a lot of freshmen at UW Green Bay. Are there freshmen in the room today? Raise your hand if you're a freshman. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming. So I also know that I can't be too mean to freshmen because there are 4 in the room. I teach a lot of freshmen in general education ethnic studies courses. And so when they see this, live a life of balance, right, the positive aspects equal the negative, I inevitably get asked a question that sounds something like this. Does this mean if my life is perfect, everything is going great, right, I got the world by the tail, everything's going good, I should walk into the grocery store and bam, punch an old lady in the face and create some negative so that my life will stay wonderful and positive? Should I make something negative happen so that nothing falls out of balance? So then I got to back up. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and just raise your hand if this applies to you. Raise your hand if you can say you have the absolute perfect, most wonderful life. Nothing negative, nothing imbalanced, nothing harmful, nothing bad has ever happened or will happen to you. Can you raise your hand? Everything's always great. Look around the room. Sometimes I'll get one person, but nobody in here is willing to say that. Okay, so here's the next question. Do you know anybody personally that has the perfect life? Nothing bad ever happens to them. They never get sick. Nothing bad ever. Do you know anybody like that who has the perfect life? Personally, you know somebody. Look around the room. You don't know anybody personally that has the perfect life. Things are bad in the UP, right? All right, now we'll go to the next question. The next question is, have you heard of somebody, or can you think of somebody that you may not know personally, but you know of them or heard of them that has the perfect life? Yes. Like, who might that be? Somebody might say, your other coworkers say, oh, that coworker, he's got it great. Yeah. So there's an example. Anybody else? Can you think of someone, you know of someone, or you've heard of somebody? Okay, criminal justice guy, you said something. You got one? Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark. We've heard of somebody in Marvel, right? Those are Marvel guys. How about any real guys? Yes. Thanks for your comment.
I would like to be Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers, yes.
Probably got a cool eye.
Yes, see, those are the answers I was looking for. From Tony Stark to Aaron Rodgers. Okay, you got one. Kate Middleton. Oh. Any others? Any others? Emma Watson. Is she Hermione?
Yes.
Not pop culture illiterate. Sometimes I
Beyonce has a pretty great life.
Beyonce, I sometimes hear. Bill Gates is another one I hear. Paris Hilton, I hear that one sometimes. That's a little surprising. So we can imagine, or we've been told, that maybe there's somebody out there that has the perfect life. Now, what about Aaron Rodgers or Kate Middleton or Emma Watson or who was your first? Beyonce. What about them gives them the appearance of having the perfect life? What is it?
The media, for the most part, only shows the positive parts, like not always, but shows the positive parts and glamorizes their lifestyle. They don't,
Like what? What about their lifestyle?
well, like their money, like their intake, like monetary
They
intake.
have money, access to resources. Yes.
They had beautiful, significant others.
They have a hot partner, right?
Correct.
Is that the case for Aaron Rodgers?
Oh,
Okay. Or they're the star athlete, right? Or they have the great physique or something about them. Now, it's interesting because when you get to be my age, I'm pushing 50. When I was, students, see, because when we go back a few years, wait, I'll get there. I'm pushing 50. When I was a freshman, I might have said, well, I'm not quite this old, but long ago, we would have said, O.J. Simpson has the perfect life. Are you in my generation where you remember a time? Raise your hand if you remember a time when O.J. Simpson we would have viewed. They're afraid to raise their hand. You raised your hand, yes. And then all we had to do, that was in the 1970s. He was jumping over Samsonite, right? He had all the endorsements. He was the star athlete with the physique and the beautiful spouse. And then what happened? The 90s. And we saw the other side of the perfect life, right? A few years ago, my students used to say Tiger Woods had the perfect life. They used to say Brett Favre had the perfect life. But all they had to do was wait 5 years. And they saw the other side of that life. And we know all too well the other side of so many celebrity lives, the other side of the wealth, right? There is a very empty, dark side for many of those people with lots of money. We know the names of those individuals, right? You know what I'm talking about? The drug abuse, the tragic deaths, the tragic ones. So in a tribal worldview, we would say, yeah, nobody has the perfect life. If at one snapshot or at one point it looks wonderful, you've got to look at the whole lifespan. Because something's going to happen along the way that's going to tip that balance. O.J. Simpson, Tiger Woods, Britney Spears. I heard Britney Spears. And then, what's the next one?
Who's this Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre?
I heard of them. In the tribal world, this notion of balance, the reason why you don't have to punch an old lady in the face, is because as human beings, the imbalance, the negativity, it's built into being human. In the order of creation, don't look at the words. Listen to the words. In the order of creation, humans are created last in the order of Anishinaabe creation. We're lowered last. We're the beings that are lowered last. I'm lowered last in the order of creation. Not because we have dominion over the other beings. Not because we're the primaries. Not because I can go around and name all the other animals and say, oh, you're this, you're going to serve me, you're that, I can eat you. We're created last in the order of creation because we're the weakest of all living things. We're the most inferior of all the other beings. Gishe Manidu dreamt into being all living things, and humans were created last because that beautiful creative energy was spent. And by the time we human beings came out, it was like this. We got a lot of words to describe that in the Ojibwe language. The humans were created last because the creative energy was spent. And that meant because we're last with the least of the amazing energy, we have the greatest dependency on all living things. We can't do it by ourselves. So we need the other beings. We need the water. and the earth and the sun and the trees and the rocks and the plants and each other. Way more than the rocks need us, than the waters need us, than the trees need us. If the waters left the earth, what would happen to human beings? Are we going to last very long? A few days, right? It would depend, right? Not very long. But if human beings left the earth, what would happen? Would the waters survive, or would the waters, the humans are gone? What would happen? The water would have a chance to heal. Now, there's water we dammed up, and we've done some funky things, right? Some waters would be affected, but for the most part, the waters are going to thrive if the human beings are gone. They don't need us. Do we need the trees? If all the trees are gone, what happens to human beings? Are we impacted? Oh, yeah. What about if the human beings are gone? Are the trees going to be okay? Oh, yeah, the trees are going to be okay. Because our dependency on other living things is greater than their dependency. They don't need us. Nobody needs us. But we need them. And by virtue of being human, whenever I take a glass of water, I'm taking another living thing. What right did I have this morning in my hotel room to turn on that shower water and bathe in that beautiful shower water? Somebody else lived in that water. That was somebody's home. I displaced somebody so I could have a clean shower this morning. What right did I have as a human being to do that? I had no right to do that. That's my dependency on other living things. Other living beings must suffer so that I can thrive as a human being. The imbalance is already there. I have to eat other things, other living beings. I don't care if it's a cow or a carrot. It was living. My dependence, somebody's got to die so I can live. The imbalance is built into being human. And so what is the meaning of life? You got to correct all of that. In thought, in action, in emotion, in spirit, always living to the best possible, the highest love for other living things, because at every moment somebody else is going to suffer because of my existence. I don't have to sock an old lady in the grocery store in the face, because tonight we're going to jump in an automobile and turn the key and use a resource that came from the earth that somebody gutted open, our mother, so I could drive my car back to Green Bay. The imbalance is built into being human. What is the meaning of life? Love each other. Love the other beings. Because that imbalance is already there. Oh, we like that slide. We use that in our class. We've been talking about elephants, too. One of my elders that I've learned an awful lot from walked on this past year. Dorothy Davids is a 90-year-old Mohican elder from the Stockbridge Muncie community. And we have this inscribed on the wall right outside our First Nation Center, just not too far from our classroom. I want to read this to you. She reminds us, she was a lifelong Indigenous educator. She was dedicated to working with pre-service teachers, diversity education, trying to get culturally appropriate curriculum into the K-12 classroom. She reminds us about our role as Indigenous educators, our role in that notion of bringing individuals, helping them to stay into balance. What is our role as educators? Among our people, she reminds us, are those we call our teachers. They are our elders, our storytellers, and our instructors. They teach us to care for ourselves in a healthy way. Some of our teachers instruct us how to use our minds intelligently to solve the problems we face in our everyday living. They teach us the names and uses of the gifts of life. Some guide us back to a healthy way of living when our thoughts and emotions become confused. Our spiritual teachers lift us up to greater meanings of life and teach us to remember our Creator. We are grateful to our many teachers. Anashik, do you agree? And that's from Dorothy Davids. So when we think about the traditional role of Indigenous educators in our traditional societies, there are intellectual teachers, the ones that help us understand knowledge. There are spiritual teachers. There are emotional teachers. They help us understand the things about everyday living, to help us maintain that balance, to help us fulfill the meaning of life. But we've come a long way from that as a result of 500 years of colonial imposition. And the Western education systems that we're a part of today have fallen a long way from helping us to maintain balance to a tremendous imbalance in the tribal world. This was the subject of the first presentation this morning. And today, institutions of higher education have a responsibility, especially in Native Studies programs, and I would argue in Gender Studies programs as well, to help individuals return to balance, to remember their roles and responsibilities as human beings, to help us reconnect to the other living things, and to remember those principles of balance. Institutions of higher education, like the Native Studies program that you have at this university, I'm so impressed with what's happening here. The folks here at this campus are doing exactly this, addressing the legacy of colonialism in the classroom through service learning projects, through tribal language classes, for example. The Gender Studies program addressing racism and sexism, as well as Native Studies and other forms of oppression. These programs can be used, and I want to encourage all of you to get involved in the development of the Gender Studies program, because that program can also be used as a tool for decolonization and helping the human beings return to balance. I was going to read these other things, but I want to get these guys involved in our presentation. There are barriers in place that prevent Native students, that prevent LGBT students, that historically have prevented women as students in higher ed from achieving and from creating a life of that beautiful balance of Gwashkwaadiiziiwin. And Max and I are going to share some of the statistics today that remind us of the imbalance that Native students experience in higher ed and the imbalance that LGBT students experience in higher ed. You want to go first?
Yeah. So while I'm reading this, if you guys want to close your eyes or just listen, more than welcome to. Just starting off with a nationwide survey, over 84% of LGBTQ students reported verbal harassment. Over 39% of all gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth reported being physically punched, kicked, or injured with a weapon at school because of their sexual orientation. While 55% of transgender youth report physical attacks because of their gender identity or gender expression. The consequences of physical and verbal abuse directed at LGBTQ youth include truancies, dropping out, poor grades, and having to repeat an entire grade. Out of 28% of gay and bisexual youth dropped out of school due to peer harassment.
In the University of Wisconsin system where we're from, I looked very hard on the internet to find statistics for your institution. I couldn't find any anywhere. Maybe these things don't exist here. I suspect not. I suspect these statistics are rather hard to find. Just because administration doesn't like to post them on the front of the website and say, hey, look at how difficult it is here. But at in the UW system, this is public information. You've got to dig for it, though. So for Native American or First Nations students in the state of Wisconsin, First Nations students have the lowest recruitment, retention, and graduation rates in the entire UW system, including our campus, UW-Madison, UW-Milwaukee. For every 1,000 Native students that graduate from a high school in the state of Wisconsin, for every 1,000, only 40 of those students take the ACT. 37 out of 1,000 apply at a UW campus. 22 out of 1,000 are admitted and enrolled as freshmen. 16 out of 1,000 stay through their first year. And 8 will graduate with a 4-year degree. 8 out of 1,000 students in the University of Wisconsin system. This is how we know that there is imbalance in our education systems today. And these are statistics, right, that we could say, okay, that's a number, but that doesn't really have a story. Our peer, our friend, our colleague here, Phoenix, has offered to share a story about what that means for an individual going to university where we are in Green Bay.
So I'm Phoenix, I guess you guys already knew that, but let's go through that again. I had that typical queer kid high school experience of everyone is a jerk, but college will be great, you'll be fine. So I'm like, okay, college, whatever. And I was nervous because being visibly queer and gender non-conforming on a campus is, I'm terrified. And I was afraid of what was going to happen. But school started, made a couple of friends, got an off-campus job, things were good. And then one night I come home from work. It's a Friday night. It's about 10:30, and I walk into my building and I go to my door. And the board on my door, which I check just in case my friend wrote your door, stuff like that. I find homophobic slur written on my door, and obviously I'm a little shaken. I think to myself, it's probably just an isolated incident. Report it to the RA, go through the humiliating experience of having the public safety department go through my entire building, probably has several hundred students in it, knock on every door, try and talk to every single student about it. The whole building knows what's going on with me. Friends across the campus. And I still tell myself, it's a one-time experience. And then a couple days later, I come home, and there it is again. And then a couple days later, there it is again. I go through the process of reporting it every time. But it starts to it sticks. The first time, obviously I'm freaked out, but it's just one jerk, nothing's gonna happen from it, but then it keeps happening. And it's to the point that the more it happens, the less I want to leave my room. And when I do leave my room, the less I want to come back. Because if I leave, there's always that fear that I'll come back and there'll be something else. But if I stay, at least at that point, no one has ever written anything on my door while I've been there. And the RA's across the hall. No one's stupid enough to do it while I'm there. And it's a couple weeks after the first incident, and my partner's over for the weekend, we're hanging out, and I go grab something from the kitchen, and there's something at my door. But I've been in my room. I've been making noise. People knew I was in there. The RA's across the hall, his door's open. This person knows that I'm in my room, knows that they could get caught, and doesn't anything. And that's the point that, I was kind of like, can you guys move me? To the second time it happens, and to the third time, it's like, can you move me? 4 times, 5 times. What happens when I'm in the room? And that's the point that I'm done. And it took an extra month after this last time for me to actually get moved. And it affected everything, to the point of I stopped going to class, I stopped talking to my friends, didn't leave the room, and if I left the room, I would stay out until 10, 11 o'clock just to come back because I was so afraid that there would be something else there. So that experience and the fact that who knows who it was, and the thing that scares me most is I came home one day to someone erasing it. So this tells me that you have that fear of if someone is taking that off my door, how many other times has it happened and I haven't noticed it? How many times have I been in my room and this person is on the other side of the door? Could have knocked on my door, I could have answered without even realizing it. That fear, it completely changed my experience, and I debated transferring schools, I debated dropping out, debated moving home, and my grades suffered, and my relationships with my friends and my peers suffered, and I was fortunate that I found really awesome, really supportive people who gave me the ability to talk about my experiences and got me the hell out of there. But it's still I live in the building next to that building right now, and for a long time, I couldn't even live in that building. But I've been able to talk about it and actually heal from it, and I actually accepted a position as the RA in that building next year. But that experience still is in the back of my mind every single day. So these statistics aren't just statistics, they're actual stories behind all of these.
And that's one reason why we need gender studies. It's one reason why we need programs like Native American Studies programs on our campuses to correct those historical imbalances and bring us back to balance and harmony for all of our students. Because that last point on there is very important. Indigenous education and gender studies programs can serve for sites for institutional transformation for all of our students. And I don't want to bring us out of balance with the statistics. We want to share one story about when Native Studies has been transformational for a student. So Kai's going to share her story. Later, okay. So what's next then? Next slide.
I'll talk just about something else. So we want to talk a little bit, if we're saying that these fields can, in fact, be forces of positive change. What are some of the features of those fields that allows that to be possible? So this diagram is from our class, which our class is called Women and Gender in First Nations Communities, and the first assignment basically that we had was to talk about what are the similarities and what are the differences between these two fields. And our class worked together to create this really wonderful diagram to help us explain that. And one of the items near the top of the list on similarities is stereotypes. And in order to just give a little demonstration of the kinds of stereotypes that still exist today, we did a little exercise in our earlier two presentations where we asked the people who were present to close their eyes and listen to several words that we read out loud that relate to gender and to First Nations people, and to write down the first thing that came into their mind. And then we collected the cards, what they wrote down, and now we'd like to share some of the responses that we got.
This particular exercise, and if you were in our second session today, I asked participants to close their eyes, and I've done this activity in so many settings. I work with middle schoolers. I've done this exercise with middle schoolers, high schoolers, high school social studies teachers, undergraduates, graduate students, college professors, and lots of different settings. And we were going to do this here today, and we decided to use the note cards instead. So we asked participants first to close their eyes, and I said the word native, native, native. And I asked participants to open their eyes and jot down on the card the first thing that came to them. Now, the purpose of this exercise isn't to call anybody out. It's not to shame anybody, and we could easily do it right here, do this exercise in the room right now. And what I've noticed about this activity, regardless of if I do this activity with middle schoolers or, even with Native people, I've done this activity, we see the same things emerge time after time after time. And when I say the word Native, so often when people are not, when they feel safe, like they can say, all right, I can be honest, I'm not going to be judged, professor's not going to come after me. So often we hear images of a very stereotypical image, right? They see a Native person in the past, a dark-skinned individual with long dark hair, scantily dressed, sometimes dancing around a campfire. And those are very similar kinds of things that many of the individuals this morning in the morning session reported, some very similar kinds of things. That's not a surprise to me. I've been doing this exercise for many years. That's clearly not what that wasn't the first thing that came to everybody's mind. There's a lot of variation in this exercise. Some people saw their family members, some people saw their best friends. So sometimes the more contact you have with Native people, that image shifts or something else replaces it in your mind. But I know that when I do that activity, every semester, first day of class, that's what the exercise I do with my students. I close my eyes, I do that exercise. I have the same stereotype. I see a dark-haired, stereotypical Plains Indian from 300 years ago. And I do this work. I live in in the tribal world. I'm an indigenous woman. That stereotype is in my head. I can't get it out of there. And when I do this exercise with participants, it's not to blame or shame, because I have that too. And this calls attention to the notion of the importance of dealing with stereotypes. It's one of the things that we explore in First Nation Studies programs. We did the same thing with the term tribe. Close your eyes. Tribe. What do people usually see? The same thing that they saw the first time, but now there's a whole bunch. A whole bunch of Plains warriors from the past, or a whole bunch of people dancing around a fire dressed in the past. Lots of people see teepees, all images of the past. And we're not to blame for those images, right? If you look at the media and popular culture, those are the dominant images. On the drive up here, we were noting how many of those images we saw along the way on water towers and billboards and all along the way, that stereotypical image of an indigenous person stuck in the past. But what's so interesting about this is the last term we used was nation. Close your eyes, nation, nation, nation. And that shifts for everybody. Because what folks start to see is they see political boundaries, they see maps, they see a globe, they see the United States, they see governing bodies, they see all kinds of things. And this underscores the importance of the shift in Indigenous studies and terminology. Why we've moved away from using the term tribe, we're trying to escape that stereotype. Linguists call it euphemistic chains. But when we use the term nation, we're talking about sovereignty. And individuals have a very clear image of sovereignty in some shape or form when you say the name, use the word nation. And that, again, represents that shift in terminology in the discipline, which is one of those overlaps between women and gender studies and First Nation studies. We also did a similar exercise with 3 terms from gender studies, and I forget who's going to talk about that.
We used 3 terms from women and gender studies. We started, we started with gender, followed by woman and feminism. When we were flipping through the note cards, what I found really interesting, I think some other people, some of my colleagues made the observation as well, that there would be 2 like neutral or maybe positive responses to gender and woman, followed by very strong words when confronted with feminism. So it's an interesting illustration of how you might feel a certain way about one thing, but then you add another similar thing, and it's totally different. What else did you?
Some things that I found really interesting when we asked the word gender, I found a lot of people writing down male, female, more biological reasoning than social. For feminism, there was mostly talk about it being a movement, it being extreme. Someone even wrote, not at saying anyone either, but someone had wrote high heels, and so on and so forth. And it seems like a lot of the times when they were describing women, they were describing more domesticated work or more nurturing positions, wives, female, those biological factors and those biological constraints.
So these stereotypes contribute to the factors that we were talking about that cause people to have a difficult time in their life and in higher education, and they also are factors in the sometimes misunderstood status of First Nation studies and women and gender studies themselves, which is another similarity that these fields have, in that they both often face quite a lot of pushback from people who are asking, why do we need these fields in the first place? You know, why do we need to study Indians? Why do we need to study women? And so we just wanted to share a few of the things that these studies to show why it is worth studying.
Another observation that we made, both in class and while we were working on the slide for the presentation, is that while each field had their own distinctions. For example, in the First Nations field, there's a focus on decolonization and sovereignty. Those are both rough parallels to a focus on liberation from oppression in gender and women's studies, or looking at and examining gendered exploitation of work. Let's see, what else? I mean, I'm sure that we could almost, if we worked a little bit harder, we could have made a much longer list and even drawn some parallel lines between the two columns just to see how, yes, these are distinct, but they're also parallel and very similar, and we can accomplish much more if we can work together on both of those things than we could by separation.
I think that something that's important to mention is the fact that the end goal of these really ends up restoring balance. Like balance as the meaning of life, balance as our goal. These two fields help us create balance in our own lives in terms of making us, we want to become better people. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who are happy to be, but I'm pretty sure most people would like to be better than they are currently. And that's a lot of the focus. A lot of the focus we have in these two fields is about deconstructing our beliefs and talking about the fact that these are shaping how we feel and how we look at these people. And just like talking about why do we feel this way? Like that's the stereotype activity. When we do that, we have to think about the fact that why is this the first thing that I think about? And that's kind of the goal of both fields, is to destroy that, like, go back and deconstruct and think, why do I think this way? Where did this come into my brain? And talk about it, because that's a really important thing to let people do when you're in women's studies or if you're in First Nation studies. Is kind of why. The big thing. Why do we do this? Why do we think this way?
Do you think they did a good job on this slide? Let's go to the next one. This work that they do in the classroom, it's not easy. The work that we do in gender studies, the work that we do in First Nation studies, students, learners, I consider myself a learner, we go through stages or having emotional reactions to the content. The faculty in the room, you know this about your students, and students in the room, you might recognize this in yourself. We wanted to talk a little bit about the stages of learning history from the perspective of a non-dominant group. So, and they also created these slides. I had 15 years, very linear slides, and the students in this class had a phenomenal discussion last week, and they said, Indigenous studies is non-linear. Poupart, why are you still presenting this to us in a linear fashion? It needs to look like this. So I said, yes, you guys are going on a trip, and you're going to talk about these slides you created. This is drawing from the work from the 1950s from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote about the stages that we go through of grieving when we experience a traumatic loss or a death, whether it's a terminal illness of our own or the loss of a loved one. Also drawing from the work of Beverly Daniel Tatum, who's an African-American scholar who wrote a very famous book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Patricia Williams, a feminist scholar and legal professor, also writing about when she is teaching African-American studies and her black students and her native students, or non-African-American students, her white students, they have to go home for their Thanksgiving break or over the winter break or their spring break. And when they go home after learning about a history of oppression, after learning about racism, and they sit down at the dinner table and say, let's talk about white privilege, Grandma. They suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I can't go home in the way I used to go home anymore. Because I'm starting to see things in my family that I didn't know were present. And it's painful for those students who are members of the dominant group to have to go back home. Patricia Williams does a beautiful job writing about them and how painful it is to teach that and to see your students go through that process and to never be able to go home in quite the same way again. And so teaching First Nation studies and gender studies for nearly 20 years, I recognize and I've changed some of these things. My students took it and changed it, and I love that. This is all a work in progress. We recognize, for example, in First Nation studies, non-Native people would be on the right side of this slide, and Native people would be on the left part of this slide. And ultimately, the goal in going through this process, where emotions are going to come up in the classroom. Tori, tell me again what students call my classes?
White guilt.
White guilt classes. I got to take Poupart's white guilt class. This is what they're talking about. It's not that we're going to see that full slide. This is going to be hard work, and I don't like it. It's going to make me feel uncomfortable. I'm going to go through a stage called guilt and shame. We usually start out somewhere at the top in denial. For white students, it sounds like this in my classes. It sounds like, you Indians, when are you going to get over it? This shit happened 500 years ago. Why are you still whining around about it? It's the students rolling their eyes, saying, you guys got casinos now. Stop teaching this stuff. Everything's okay now. Get over it. That's the denial and minimization stage. Students, my white students will move around this continuum. Often, if they move out of denial, some can stay in denial and minimization forever. Some will move out of that and into anger, and that sometimes sounds, it gets directed at me. I hate that woman. I hate this class. I don't want to hear what she's saying. I don't want to hear this content. I don't like her anymore. They blame the messenger. There's also another expression of this anger. Most often, hear me saying this, it's not they hate me, that's rare. That was true 20 years ago. It's very rare now. Most often, students, they'll come into my office and it sounds like this. Why didn't somebody tell me this when I was in high school? Why did I have to have the privilege of going to college before I had to find out about American Indian history? They're angry that nobody told them any sooner who Columbus was from an indigenous perspective. They're mad about it. They feel their K-12 education failed them. And I'm the last person that's going to blame K-12 educators, because they got a lot to do. And teaching about Columbus from an indigenous perspective is not on the test, right? They're angry about that. They'll continue to move around. Sometimes students are sad. They start to grieve. They'll cry sometimes and say, this hurts me. These readings are painful. The land that I live on, I didn't ask for this privilege. I didn't ask to be born on this land. I inherited these privileges. I didn't ask for them, but I got them anyway. And that's where the guilt comes in, and sometimes the shame. And we can't stay stuck there, because then it just becomes white guilt class. And that's all backward looking. I want my students to land in the center. And they have to keep moving through guilt and shame, through a healing process that includes radical acceptance. And they changed this terminology. It used to just say acceptance. And they said, no, that's not enough. Because anybody can say, yeah, I get it. Columbus was a bad guy, and the first Thanksgiving, that's all screwed up. But I get it. And I just accept it. Things are the way they are. And these folks said, nope, that gets you off the hook too easy. We're talking about radical acceptance, where you're going to now do something about it. You're going to change the way you live. You're going to teach about this and say, yeah, I'm a part of this now. And then landing in the center as authentic ally. For Native people moving around in this, through this process, the denial is often similar. This is painful. I don't want to accept or acknowledge that this happened to my family. It's too much. I don't want to look at, I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back in history. I don't want to see it. And then there's a shock, acknowledging, oh my God, this happened to us. This happened to my grandmother. It happened to my family. And then comes, oftentimes, these are not predetermined, right? But oftentimes, anger and rage. Anger that a nation, the U.S., that many students grew up being trained to love, and honor and regard and fight for, that nation has betrayed them, committed genocide against their own people, and they're angry about that. I think that's where the stereotype of the angry Indian comes from. I'm serious about that we're angry about that history, but we don't get to see that, images of Native people outside of that. Because I encourage my students to keep moving through our classes, this was the subject of the first presentation, to mourn that history, to grieve it, to give expression to it, so that we can heal and become change agents in our families and our communities. And again, we continue moving. When we just finished reading Andy Smith's book, Sexual Conquest in American Indian Communities. I went through denial, shock, anger, all over again as I was rereading that book. So simply because I've been doing this work for 20 years, doesn't mean I get to land in the center and it's all good now. I cycle through this again. When I teach or I facilitate generational healing workshops, I cycle through it again. You guys want to say something about this? Well, yes. We'll pass it down.
Personal story about change agent. So one of the greatest experiences I've ever had was taking gender development across lifetime at the University of Green Bay with Dr. Eileen Kupit. And during that time, I had not really given much thought to gender. I had, going into it, human development, psych major. I knew, for obvious reasons, I was going to work with boys and girls. After that part, I didn't really give it much thought. While going through the class, we started talking about feminism. And I had true misconceptions about feminism. I believed that feminism was a girls-only club, that boys weren't allowed. And luckily, she didn't strike me right down in there after I had said these absurd things. But she played it so simple and so precise that she had just asked me, do you believe that no matter what your race, sex, gender, race, or ethnicity, you should be treated equally? And I said yes. And she said, I am a feminist. And I truly believe that today, that I am a feminist, because that is what I'm fighting for. And that was my change agent story.
As I'm involved in both First Nation Studies and Gender Studies courses, and as someone who is, it's really interesting to be in those two classes or in those two subjects, because I'm in both of those circles. I'm in my Gender Studies classes, when I'm doing the readings, I'm feeling like coming from a place where I'm perceived and treated by society as a woman. I am gay. I'm going through those motions, and then I go to my First Nation Studies class, and I'm a white settler. That's the privilege that I carry. And I'm going through a whole different circle, and I'm sorry, it has been a really long day. It's difficult to describe. I think I'll just leave it there if my words are failing me.
But this is the point that in a span of 2 class periods, you move from being a member of a privileged group to a member of a disempowered group. And the emotions mirror each other, yet they're distinct and different.
Yeah. It's, how many people here use the internet? Everyone, right? Most of us. I'll go on Facebook and I'll see another headline about another police shooting. I'll see another headline about, gosh, any number of things. Another Indigenous woman has gone missing in Canada, or there's another update on that situation. And as a white person, it hurts. It is painful to be hearing about that and to be aware that this is something that a group I am a part of is responsible for. And it feels like a little pin into my heart every time. And it's very easy to just wallow and be like, oh, this is making me really upset and miserable. I just wanted to look at pictures of my sister's cat. Why is this on my newsfeed today? But there is a time and a place for those emotions. That's a human response. It's fine and appropriate, but what's even more important is that I continue to focus on moving forward and past them. Just the only way to the other side, like you can't go over the mountain, you can't go to the side or tunnel underneath, you have to go through it. And as somebody who is a part of some minorities, I know what I want to see out of my allies. I am not here to, maybe if like you're a really good friend and I know you're trying, I'll pat you on the back for trying, but other times it's just, your feelings are valid, but I want to see what you can do to help me, what you can do to help change the world around me and support me as a gay woman. So it's an interesting compare and contrast, and I really, when we first did this, the Venn diagram exercise, I remember, Lisa, you were talking about how I think on several of our lists we mentioned be a better person as one of the similarities or something. And we were talking about these studies making us better people, and you said that you've never seen that before. And I feel like, I don't know if it's like a generational thing or a millennial thing, but that's really what I feel like I'm getting out of this experience. And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
I think looking at the perspective of the non-dominant group and the dominant group writing about the history is really, really important for people who are part of non-dominant groups. Because I know that back when I was a small gay baby, I used to we would talk about racism. And I would tell myself, I can understand racism because I understand this form of oppression. And I would almost give myself a free pass and be like, well, I don't have to think about this as much because I can just understand this. And I feel like it's really easy for people who are part of these marginalized groups to automatically assume that we're going to go through the same experience that the members of a different marginalized group do when they learn about their experiences. And that's something that we really have to check ourselves on, because that's something that I've noticed in myself. And I think it's something that's really important to kind of think about, the fact that just because I'm queer, that does not mean that I understand what being Native is like. Just because I'm trans, that does not mean that I understand what having a physical disability is like. These are so many different intersections that we have to think about. And it's so easy to be like, well, I'm oppressed, so I don't have to think about it because my privilege is less because I'm oppressed on this other axis. So I think it's really important to look at it through those intersections of you have privilege and you lack privilege in certain areas, and you have to look at it through the whole picture and not just kind of give yourself a free pass because of your membership of another oppressed group.
They trust me to think I know what I'm doing.
So basically, just to summarize what the really main point of what we're getting at in this presentation is that in Indigenous worldviews, balance is the meaning of life, as Dr. Poupart has said, and what that really means is taking positive actions and making positive changes in the world. And these two disciplines of gender studies and First Nation studies have really great possibilities to make those changes, and higher education as a whole has the possibility to be a force for positive good in the world. But I wanted to share a personal story that just kind of, I think, shows how different actions, different ways that higher education can either help or harm, students' ability to flourish. So for me personally, I into college, I didn't have a very strong identity as a Native person when I went into college. I really wanted to get out of town. I wanted to go to a big city, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went down to Chicago, and I went to a big fancy school that didn't have really much of a Native Studies program, that was really focused on the Western classics. And as time went on, I became increasingly depressed. I had a really hard time in my classes because I found we were reading texts that referred to my people as primitive, that disparaged our ways of life. Sometimes that actually talked about our practices in ways that were incorrect, and I was expected to not say anything. I was expected to keep my emotions inside and just react on a purely intellectual level. And that was incredibly difficult, and I'm still really trying to learn how to get past that and how to be allowed to feel my own emotions. And at the same time, there was very little Native presence on campus. I knew one other Native woman at my entire university. And I just found that I really lacked that community. And so eventually I came back home to Green Bay, where I had heard that the First Nation Studies program was really great from some of my friends who went to school there. And I decided to enroll in a class over the summer, or during the fall semester. And the change was incredible because the First Nations program at UWGB really focuses on community involvement and recognizing the emotional impact that these topics have in our lives. And since doing that, I've just felt so much better. I've really come into my identity a lot more, and it's just made me feel a lot more capable of making those changes, making me feel like I'm making a difference in getting my education and applying it in the world. So I just wanted to share that story as an example of ways that these things can have tangible effects on students' lives.
So in closing, I want to encourage all of the students in the room to become involved in the creation of a gender studies program on this campus. For the nurturing and the growing of our minds and our hearts as individuals, so that we can all return to balance. I encourage all the students in this room and on the campus to take a Native Studies course to help you remember your connection to all living things, so that you too can return to balance. And that maybe just, if you're totally tuned out right now, but just one little piece of something that we've said today enters into you and stays with you down the road when you need it, when things are out of balance for you, that it might help you return to that state of balance and harmony. In closing, we have some acknowledgments up here. I want to make sure that we acknowledge all of our elder teachers, all of our relatives, all of the ancestors who guided us on our journey here, who will guide us on our journey back home this evening, that carved the path for us as teachers, as learners. And it was really important for us to present together today to demonstrate to you in Indigenous education, we're all teachers. We're all learners. We have sophomores here. We have seniors here. We have somebody with a bunch of letters after her name here. And we're all teachers. We're all learners. We acknowledge our elders who came before us to help us to remember how to return to Indigenous teaching and learning as a community, how to teach as a community. We acknowledge and we're grateful to our hosts. They fed us so much good food and so much good coffee since we got here. And to the student peers that stayed with us and have been hanging out with us, I know I have been treated so well, and I know that's true for all of us. And thank you to all the listeners who came tonight and have come throughout the day, who listened with open hearts and with open minds, and just that one little piece of something that we've said, we hope that stays with you over time. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your graciousness in our mistakes today. I know there were many things that we left out, that we could have included, that we could have said differently, that we could have said better at times. I'll speak for myself. And so thank you for your graciousness in overlooking our imbalances, because we're still learning. How did they do?
Before we leave and depart, first I have a couple of things I want to see. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions for our panelists at all for this evening?
Nothing to say, nothing at all.
Real diet.
What's your name, please?
Nicole.
Nicole, thank you.
I'm wondering, I'm a nursing student, so my perspective is slightly, I don't know, different, I guess, because it's nursing. But I'm wondering, we've really been hitting on the fact that as nurses, we need to really ask about the culture and how they identify themselves. And so just from a personal perspective, have you had healthcare providers ask you, are you male, female, are you queer, are you gay, are you whatever, like, are you getting this, are you getting asked this at all in the healthcare field?
So thank you for that question. I'm only going to repeat it for the sake of our viewers away from here, and that is the question being a nursing major, Nicole is, that she's being asking our panel, are they being asked by healthcare providers about identity specific probably to the LGBTQA community?
Not as often as I should be. And when it is, there's so little education that I'm often educating my doctors about my experiences and my body as they're supposed to be treating me. And that's something that I'm really glad that you do talk about in your program, about like the fact that it is on you to understand, because it is so draining to be like, I have a massive amount of pain, I would really like you to just treat me. And I do not want to have to explain in great detail every facet of my identity. And educating yourselves and knowing when to ask is fantastic. So I really appreciate that.
I've never been asked anything about my gender identity, and the only way that I've ever been asked anything about sexual orientation is the totally not awkward question of, who do you have sex with? So I don't know about you guys, but every time I go in, they always, like for my annual checkup, like that's just policy, it must just be policy, I don't know what the case is, but it's just like, it's so awkward, and it's also just like, so if I had sex with someone of this gender the one time, do I have to like report that the following years? Like how does, like there's no, it's really uncomfortable and awkward, and I would really not be surprised if there's a lot of people lying about that, where it's just, I don't know, I can't think of anything offhand that would be like a better alternative, but there's gotta be something better than saying, who do you like to jump in bed with? So that's my piece.
Any other questions?
Actually, can I make a quick answer as well to Nicole's question from a local hospital perspective? Marquette General Hospital, which I think now is a different name, Duke or something, several years ago had asked about Native peoples, Native families. Obviously now a lot of Native families utilize services in the UP health system, and so I will not forget, and for those of you who know, you'll get this better than others who don't know, I was asked about smugging, not smudging, because for those of you who don't know, there is a healing ceremony involving sweetgrass or sage or some others that is a washing of oneself in smoke. And so the patient advocate over there was been very, very good about allowing us to do that for patients of traditional indigenous backgrounds, to allow us to do smudging, but it is smudging, not smugging. So anyone in the future needs to know that. That is that is helpful. But our healthcare folks have invited us in to do workshops and trainings with them too. So that's from the Indigenous perspective. And yes, Professor.
When I listen to your presentation, I feel so, I just feel validated about about my background. Because when I teach Tai Chi classes for the hyper department, Tai Chi is all about balance, harmony, balance. Those are the two key words. And the two key words actually from ancient Taoism. Taoism is about, human beings are not above nature. We are just part of nature. And just like a grass, flower, and trees, and we all go through the process from birth to decay, and the next generation continue. So as a human being, every one of us is a universe. The whole universe is so vast, endless, and each human being also is a universe. So our mind, our body are so come together, needed to this balance, a harmony to bring it together. So I'm so grateful for your presentation. It validated my belief and my practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Real quick.
Another professor.
I guess just, when you asked earlier about perfect people, what came to my mind is that, I hate to sound so philosophical, but just, it's late. So I don't want to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking this. So, we're both perfect and imperfect at the same time. So everybody I know is perfect, and everybody I know is imperfect. And I think that is our balance.
Much. Thank you. So can I ask Dr. Yulin to give me a hand with our gifts that we have for each one of our professors? As is customary within the Indigenous communities, and we obviously like to practice all of that as best we can, is we have a gift for each one of our presenters that is made up of gifts from both the Gender Studies program and Native Studies program. So we very, very much appreciate their time, their energy, their late night travel that they're going to impart on in just a few moments as they leave. But with that, one last gift of applause for all of the presenters. Enjoy.